the time because I don't get injured that easily.
Hi, Josh from British Strongman Coaching. Paul Smith as a guest today. So we're going to go for how to coach. Oh, sorry. We'll go on the first one. Is it better to prioritise specificity over availability for certain events? How did Paul Smith train for the Nicol Stones? So I'll introduce here and say that Paul did the Nicol Stone walk at
World Tour Finals.
Yeah, but you did the one at the Arnold's a few weeks ago, didn't you? And you bombed and you didn't do well and you weren't happy with your performance. And then you've gone and trained it a little bit more specifically. And then you've essentially set the new world record that obviously got beaten on the day, but like you put a record breaking performance in. So what did you do? And how did you train for the Arnold's actually, first of all? Like, because you don't have access to the Nicol Stones. So how did you prepare for that? And then we'll talk about how it changed and how you progressed.
So I didn't actually train for the Stones and the Arnold. I had a few comps coming up and also getting married, so it wasn't a typical prep for me. Also, it being a grip event and something when I've tried before, I've been very good at it. I kind of left that on the back burner because I had probably 11, 12 different events to train across the comp. So I had one session at Rhino's gym with, well, what I thought was a comp kit ended up being different stones, and I didn't quite have the rings right. So it was a bit of an odd job of just trying it. So I barely trained at all, but I just thought my grip would carry me through. But obviously it didn't. I completely bombed out. Then training for Nicol Stones, I think I did 4 sessions on the Dinny ring kind of simulators, just doing hold to hook grip, just to get used to that, pain tolerance and position. And then I had 1 session with Mark Haydock actually doing some walking stones. I think that was the Sunday before the comp. So I got some experience on the actual rings and carried them. Obviously the uneven being hit in the legs. And then that was me done for the comp. So it's not like I had a massive amount of training, but it was just nailing down that technical bits of getting the hook grip set right and then just trusting my general strength.
So you could see it with a few guys at the Arnold's, like they obviously hadn't trained super specifically. So what kind of things would people be doing for like the Nicol Stones, for example?
So if I had a proper prep for it, I would be on the, assuming you haven't got any walking stones near you, which you probably haven't, I'd be on the Dinny ring simulators and just getting used to actual carries. Because the main thing with the stones, it's a hook grip and then it's also bouncing across your legs. So someone like me who's good at farmers walking nice and fast is completely different because you just can't build up that speed. You'll build that speed for a couple of meters and then the stone will slip over in front or behind your leg and it'll just take you out. So it's all about building up that really short, shallow step, building your rhythm, also trusting your grip, trusting your traps and not rushing because it was hard with the Nicol Stone. So about 10 meters in, I felt like I was dying. So it just felt really heavy and it was weird going so slow. It felt like I had a long, long way to go. So it's just digging in and getting used to that kind of suffering and not rushing, trusting your grip, trusting your legs and just go slow enough that you can control the stones all the way through.
Yeah. So it's like something that I always preach, that the more specific you can, like I'm a massive fan of specificity, and like the more specific you can be to your upcoming comp, then the better. Like I think a lot of people underestimate the specific skills that you can develop. It's not just about like if you look at it fundamentally, using this as an example, I think a lot of people would logically trick like, oh, it's grip and you're moving with it. So you would think that farmers walks, logically, it's going to have a lot of transfer, but it's something that you can't underestimate how priceless it is to, like, even if it's just traveling one session to go and get you, like, it's completely unique, isn't it?
Oh yeah, I was like 95% more confident after going to see Mark because the grip felt really solid. I got a couple of decent runs in with the stones and I knew what to expect. I didn't bother with farmers. I knew it's so different. If you've done farmers, you just think, oh, my grip feels strong. I'm moving fast, but it's just a completely different stimulus. And I think it could also almost be counterproductive with the farmers because you're going for them time goals and then suddenly you pull back so slow. You've got to really grind through it. It might be useful, like if you had farmers that are quite awkward and you did the kind of really slow carries, that'd probably be closer. But again, I think you really need to get the rings. And for me, learning the hook grip
Yeah.
Or well, learning it, applying it to the rings was key.
So I think for you, like having the experience doing it now, I think you're going to get like, if you didn't have access to the rings, for instance, using this as an example, like once you've experienced it once, you can kind of work backwards a little bit from that. Like you can imagine how that felt, and then, you know, like say replicate it somewhat with the, you know, the farmer's footwork. You know, like you could maybe load one side more than the other, for instance.
Yeah, of course.
You could practice with hook grip. You could try and pick the handles with the thinnest grip, for instance, which is never going to replicate what you do at the comp. But I suppose getting on that kind of, on the continuum from somewhere between non-specific and doing the actual thing, it gets you a little bit closer, doesn't it?
Yeah, definitely. I think it's one of them, once you've actually done the event, you can practice the skills individually much more easy. It's a bit like if you're boxing and you learn how to shadow box and pad work and bag work and you're great, and then you get thrown in a ring and you obviously it's completely different.
You get smacked in
the face and the whole world. I remember it happening, and it's different to looking good on a combination on pads. But once you sparred a bit, then bringing your shadow boxing up, bringing your footwork up, bringing your bag up, then it carries over. But you kind of need the exposure to the event first before those skills carry over as much, or it'll make them carry over much, much more.
Yeah. So I like I say, a massive fan of specific exposure, and also from a coaching perspective as well, like getting in there and, you know, like you helping your client to where it comes up in a comp, like you're going to be able to offer so much more value because you know how that feels in your thumb. You know, when you're halfway down, you know that, you know what, I'm going to finish this, but I'm in agony. I don't need to stop. I can keep going. Yeah. But that I've been thinking of it recently. Is that I saw an analogy the other day, and it was about, you know, like say, there's obviously this debate about whether you, as a coach, whether you need to be able to walk the walk kind of thing.
Yeah.
So a good example I read recently was about juggling, and it was about like reading the theory on juggling and being an expert on knowing how to juggle. But
can't learn how to juggle in a book, can you?
Well, that's it. But and that feeling of like every person who's learned to juggle has literally dropped it hundreds of times before they've got anywhere with it. Yeah. Do you know what I mean?
Have you ever juggled?
No. Well, a little bit.
But you get it. You're like, oh, I've got it. But it's that feel, isn't it? It's complete feel. Yeah, feel like. Sorry, go on.
No, go on. But that experience of like knowing what it feels like when you know, just failing repeatedly, and then you're having to go and your back's aching from picking it up so many times. Like getting in there and that kind of exposure to it. So I think for people who are training for like, they've got like a specific awkward event. I don't know. It might be like, say, a car deadlift, or it might be like, say, an awkward implement in a medley or something. Like, I'm a massive fan of, obviously, go and get as much exposure as you can. But realistically, if you're 6 weeks out from a comp and you have to travel 2 hours to get there,
might not be practical.
Yeah.
Or it might be somewhere where the kit hasn't been made, or it's in storage somewhere.
Yeah, so that happens quite a lot, doesn't it? But I think the value in getting your hands on it as soon as possible, and then like you like using that example of like you doing that session with Mark Haydock, for instance, and then you can like kind of work backwards off that. Obviously, you probably go and do a few more sessions with him and get better with it, but you're going to be able to, the stuff that you're replicating in your own training is going to be so much more valuable once you've had the exposure, and then work backwards from that. Yeah. Rather than just trying to project that, oh, well, if I do farms a bit like this, it's going to transfer.
You know yourself as well, the adrenaline and everything, it's you're already under such pressure. So you got the pressure and a novel stimulus, and it's all hitting you, and your time to figure it out is when you've got the stones in your hands. It's a hard time to be calculating things. You want to know going in. Like, because I picked it up, I thought, you know, it felt like I expected it to feel. But if I hadn't done it before, it'd have been like, whoa, this is a lot to figure out whilst I'm trying to stagger down the course with it.
Brilliant. So at the World Tour Finals, you broke the world record, first of all, and then came fourth overall. Absolutely brilliant out of the 12 athletes. But what was particularly inspiring for me was the fact that I'd seen you struggle with at the Arnold a few weeks previously, and then obviously I know what you've done and like reflected on it and look at where you need to improve, like objectively. and you've gone away and done that. So just tell us a little bit more about that, like what you did, not necessarily in regards to the Nicol stones in particular, but the fact that you've reflected on a performance and, you know, kind of just learn from it, I suppose. Right?
Yeah. So with the stones, I've done like dinny pickups before, and I've walked a little bit with the full weight. So I thought basically just an ego thing of thinking my grip would be strong enough, because 9 times out of 10 it is. But it was that kind of ego kicking in of not bothering with the more efficient technique, and not bothering as much, but not prioritizing it in terms of other events. So just thinking, all right, hold on, this event needs a bit more specific practice. It don't need me to get any stronger at all. It just needs me to actually practice on the implements and get my technique down. You know, some events, once you've got the technique, there's not massive improvement. It's about getting strong. And then some events, you can make massive inroads just from increasing your skill. So with that one, it was just let's get some quick specific working, because it was 2 weeks between comps. And realistically, there's not going to be any strength change. It was just thinking, right, there's a new technique. What do I need to do? Who knows what they're doing? Obviously, Mark Cadot was a guy to go to. You know, done it one t-shirt. So it's just a case of thinking, right, forget my ego, that didn't work. Let's break it down. And it's all a case of I did the wrong technique. Guys that weren't as strong as me beating me just because they did the right technique. So it's just going away and learning that.
Yeah, so just a brilliant lesson that in the space of I suppose as you're getting close to comp, like I always say, if you're within like 2 weeks or something, like you're not going to get any stronger, but you can get significantly more fatigued.
Yes.
So that's something that you need to do in terms of, like, say, managing the work and make sure that you're getting to comp and your fatigue isn't masking your fitness and your ability.
Yeah.
But also another thing in that last little 2 weeks, which a lot of people miss the boat at, in my opinion, is that in the last 2 weeks, you're not going to get any stronger, but you don't want to accumulate fatigue, but you can still accumulate quite a lot of skill.
Yeah, of course.
And you've proven that in between the Arnold event and the World Tour finals, that, like you say, you haven't got any stronger. You're just making sure that you wanted to be recovered for this comp, but you've gone from, say, finishing pretty low down on the Nicol walk to being one of the best in the world, isn't it? Like, fact. So I think it's absolutely brilliant, mate. So next question. So for general cardio, is there anything that you find particularly useful for strongman?
Not particularly in the fact that it's better than one method's better than the other. I remember when I started, it was a classic thing of you've got to do high intensity interval training because that mimics strongman. And then I think everyone learned that it absolutely ruins you when you're trying to train really heavy for a strongman comp and you're chucking a load of intervals on top. It just wipes you out. And then I think there's been a shift towards how beneficial like this is, like really just low intensity, nice long duration cardio. So for me, I use an assault bike for my kind of medium intensity sessions. It might be 10 to 20 minutes where I'm pushing fairly hard, but not really maximally. I like that.
And describe the level that you work at there. Like, what are you feeling in like your heart rate and your legs and stuff? Like, what kind of level are you working at?
No.
It's so hard to put.
Yeah, I'm never a big numbers guy, especially heart rates, because my heart rate gets so high. I've had it up into 250s, so percentages wise, yeah. I bet good money that it's up close to 300 on a medley, but I've never measured it. I don't know why that is. It just seems to be a bit of a thing of mine. But I'm doing like a 10 to 20. It'll generally be I'm going for a set distance and doing a bit of a time trial. But again, sometimes it will be like all out. Let's say I'm doing 5 miles. Sometimes it'll be 75, 80%. But you're looking like you're getting a heart rate's elevated, but you're getting a decent bit of lactate too. So you're having to push through pretty hard, pretty early on. So a couple of minutes in, you're starting to feel fatigue, and then you're kind of carrying that through to like 10, 15, 20 minutes. But that's something, again, I'm quite careful with, because even that I can find if I've done a really hard session, it can just be a bit of a slog. Mm-hmm. But what I find really, really, really beneficial all year round is something I didn't mean to do. Just when I moved in with Shannon, especially over lockdown, we just started walking every day. And I've always walked quite a bit, but I wouldn't I wouldn't often go for daily walks. I just end up walking to the gym or walking to uni, whatever. But we'll go on a walk pretty much every day for about an hour, and we just live in a fairly hilly area, so walk up through the park quite up and down. But I just noticed fairly recently, after we've been doing this a couple of years now, and I noticed how I didn't feel like I'd been for a walk at the end. I was walking up hills and I was still like nasal breathing, and at no point did I feel like I was exerted. And even at the start, even though I was pretty fit for a strongman, there'd be points at which, like, you're walking up a hill, you're like, your calf might be burning a bit, or you're just getting a bit out of breath where talking's a bit more difficult. So the kind of just general benefits of that really low intensity, long duration aerobic work has definitely made me fitter. But I've also noticed over that time, recovery between sessions has got really good. I mean, it was good before, but now I'll get a lot of work into a 2-hour session and still feel okay. So I think the key thing is with general cardio, first of all, it's something you're going to do. Because I tell people that I can give you the best program in the world, but if you're not going to do it, it doesn't matter. And two, something that's low intensity enough to not impact your recovery. And people, don't be scared of doing too little with cardio, because people think kind of, I'm not going to go out for a 10K run, so there's no point. It's like, well, just walk for 20 minutes. It's like what you said, recovery. Walk for 10 minutes. Even walk for 3 minutes will be more beneficial than not walking. But people have a threshold where they're like, if I'm not going to hit that, there's no point. It's like everything we're going a bit off tangent, but with stretching, I'll try and get like a 10-minute stretching every day. But if I'm really busy and I can't, I'll stretch my hamstrings for 30 seconds and they'll feel a bit better. I've done something. So don't be scared to set the bar really, really low. As long as if you're hitting just a little bit of something, it will be massively beneficial, rather than thinking, there's no point. There's no point of doing that. I see it all the time.
I think a problem with going for a walk. Well, I'm completely with you in that, and I want to drive that point home. But people, until you actually do it, and like, it's interesting that you say like you kind of found out by chance, really, even though you've heard people talk about it for years and the benefits. And I was exactly the same, where it was just one of those things that you hear and you just think, oh God, I'd rather have something more fancy or something that I can pay for that give me the same benefits. Whereas actually just doing it and making yourself do it and reflecting how you feel, like, it's not cool. It's not cool. I think that's why people don't seem to do it. But the general benefits, I suppose, without going too deep with it, a thing that I really like is getting into like a parasympathetic state and just chilling down that nervous system, like, because even the stuff like, say, if you're doing like, say, the other stuff like interval training and stuff like that, especially when you're competitive, and especially when you're, say, someone like me or someone like Shannon, for instance, like, it's actually quite hard for us to, once we're actually in the situation, it's actually quite hard not to work hard. Do you know what I mean?
I struggle with that bad on the assault bike. I've got better at it now, but for years, in fact, it would put me off doing cardio, because even go for like a run, I've run a bit more recently, but when I was training for like rugby and boxing, I sometimes not go for a run because I'm like, right, my PB is this time.
Yeah.
And I'm like, I ain't got it in me. So I'll just not go, because I knew I couldn't go. And, that knowing that I wouldn't beat my time, it just killed me. Rather than just thinking, I'll just go and do a nice jog, because people used to talk about recovery runs. I could never do it. It's always been hard, like assault bike, as you've got numbers there, so you're always trying to beat it. So I'm really trying to pull myself back now. But the thing with walk, you just like walking, you're talking. There's no data on it.
So I think a really good way to look at this is like, if we want to, all the coaching that I do, even though I like going really in depth, and like what I'm really passionate about is simplifying things.
Yeah.
And the thing that we can simplify in terms of like general training is like sympathetic, parasympathetic, or just basically getting fired up and going mad and taking from the bank account, and then getting more chilled out in terms of parasympathetic and putting stuff into the bank account. But I suppose what my point is like what I've found challenging in the past is trying to do some parasympathetic state or putting stuff back into the bank account. But actually, because that competitive nature is taking over, it's actually becoming becoming costly. So I think that's a fantastic thing about walking. Like I've tried a few different things. Like I went to yoga a couple of weeks ago, and I fell asleep. So it was too far.
Well, my experience with yoga is the other way, because I went to a yoga class that my friend ran, and it was a little bit more circuity type.
Yeah.
So I was going thinking recovery, because I used to train, and I go to yoga, and I go to salsa after, because I'm a salsa dancer. And I go to yoga thinking I'm having a nice stretch, I'm really going to chill out. And we'd end up doing a lot of it was yoga moves, it was intense, it was fast. So it was a lot of just body weight kind of stuff. It was a bit more Pilates style. So I'm going after you. I'm like, God, I'm out of breath, I'm sweating. I feel like I've trained a bit again. And then I was going salsa, which if I'd have been in quite a relaxed state, would have been quite a relaxing thing. But because I was elevating my heart rate again, it just felt like it was taking more and more out of me. So I had to stop doing yoga, because it was just giving me the wrong stimulus, and it was just sending me up rather than bringing me down. Obviously, if you fall asleep, you've kind of gone too far the other way.
Yeah. So personally, I find just taking the dog for a walk, and it is just brilliant for that, because you can't fall asleep because you're walking. But for me, and just being honest, I'm somebody who's always I'm always go, and I find it really, really tough to chill out. So that's a really good thing for me. I've tried other. I really like CrossFit, and the best CrossFit sessions I've had is I've had to get in the mindset of, right, whatever we're doing, I'm going to go at a 6 out of 10 or a 5 out of 10. But then there's been a couple of times I've gone to CrossFit, felt great, and then there's been something where there's somebody else in there who's pretty strong or whatever, and I've had to try and beat him, or there's been a run element in there, and I've been jogging, and then somebody's overtaken me, and
it's hard not to.
And I'm like, well, I can run past him easily, and it's hard to kind of draw that line. But then you go over that line, and then the next day I've got DOMs, and I'm like, it's defeating the object of what I'm actually doing it for.
Yeah.
So it is tough. But yeah, I find that to really. So obviously the question, general cardio. Personally, I think looking at the list, so looking at the kind of low, chilled out, sympathetic, blah blah blah, kind of putting into the bank account, if you will. And I'm a fan of going really quite far the other end, so doing high intensity sprints, say less than 10 seconds work, loads of rest, quite intense, mainly concentric stuff, prowler sprints, hill sprints, throwing, but stuff where you're not accumulate, you're not getting near that kind of, where your legs are burning or anything. It's just short, sharp.
Yeah, I
think it's the bit in the middle that's dangerous and can.
Yeah, because when I have kind of the intense cardio and the more conditioning side, I'll plan that in more as a training session. Whereas more general cardio, I start to think about it more as recovery. But then the trouble is when you add it as an extra session, thinking it's not a training session, it's taking stuff out of you. So you need anything that's additional to your actual programmed in work to be putting you in that parasympathetic state and giving you back. Just one thing, a little tip. The cross trainer is a good one to use, because I just consider it such a soft and wet piece of kit that my ego doesn't actually kick in, which sounds a bit daft, but you've got to do what works for you. If I got a treadmill even, I'm still trying to beat numbers, or assault bike, I'm thinking of numbers that I've seen. Whereas on a cross trainer, no one's actually competing on cross trainers, are they? So it's something I can just do, and I'm not trying to beat anything. So that's been a useful one for me. If I'm in a gym, I'll get on a cross trainer. I can go in that 20, 30, 40, 50 minutes without my ego being like, oh, I need to go faster.
Yeah. Another good mode for me that I've used in the past for just general conditioning, heart rate, not making my joints or etc. But still, that's a simple way of putting it. You want to find a level you can work at while sparing the joints, basically.
Yeah, of course.
So yeah, treadmill for me, for instance, I'll do it and I feel good, or say even playing football, Like the problem is, say like with people like us, I suppose, like we could go and play sport because our fitness is pretty good, but you can just very easily do too much damage because of your like cardiorespiratory kind of ability to do the work, but you haven't built up. We're not doing it regularly enough to build up the recovery capacity in terms of like soft tissue and stuff.
Yeah.
So I think that a good thing for me that I've found. Yeah, swimming's really good because it's
just started doing a bit of swimming because we just joined at the health club, and it's
again concentric only,
nice range of motion, and you feel quite relaxed just being in that environment. It doesn't feel like I'm going. It feels like I'm in a health club rather than feel like I'm in a competitive environment.
Yeah, like if I was doing, and then don't get me wrong, I don't think I ever would, to be honest, because I like doing specific stuff like complexes and throwing, and I like to do sprints with yoke and stuff if I was doing general conditioning. But if I was doing general conditioning, I think that another thing is finding inefficient exercise can be good. Like I am terrible at swimming. So actually it's a really good mode of me working hard and getting my heart rate going through my chest, like my heart rate really high. And I don't feel like I'm working that hard, like in terms of my joints and stuff. Whereas like take a bike, for instance, I feel like to get my heart rate up, my legs are absolutely smoked because I'm having to go so fast or against so much resistance because I'm pretty good at it.
I remember reading that ages ago. It was about someone trying to swim and lose weight, but I think they used to be swimming like college, and it just wasn't working because it's so efficient. But it was for me swimming, it feels like I'm dying after 30-40 meters. But I started going bouldering. Now I'm in my off-season block, and Jesus Christ, that absolutely ruins me. And again, I feel like joints-wise, it's not taking too much out. Obviously, getting forearm burns, but heart rate is just so high. They've just got so much body weight, obviously being supported constantly. And an hour, it just kills me cardio-wise. It's fun. And it just carries over so well because it doesn't take a load out. I mean, my back's fine, my knees are fine, but it's just such an inefficient way for me to move.
Cool. So we'll lead us on to the next thing. So we've talked about it a little bit in terms of like energy systems here and like tried to simplify the getting in the sympathetic state, parasympathetic state. But can you build on what we've said in terms of like building like a phase of training or like in terms of periodization or whatever? Like you've just mentioned that you're like, say, obviously you've done like a lot of comps recently in the last 3 or 4 months, and you've done you could call it competition phase, peaking phase, specific phase, whatever. And now you're in your what people are calling off season or whatever. So can you just give us like an example of like a rough 12 months? And I know it's so hard because opportunities come up.
Yeah. So if you talk through like the last year, so kind of let's start from the end of the last off season. So Brits was late January, early Feb. So from like mid-November, I'm in. To be fair, this one's been pretty simple. It's been kind of comp prep for Britons, and then after that, it was UK's, but I had about 13 weeks. So I think I did a couple of weeks of like a general prep mobility kind of structural, but all those work. Basically, a light block, making sure I was recovered.
Yeah, that's what I'm asking you. You know what you've just said, like light block. Like I want it as simple as possible for people to apply. Yeah, and then you can kind of explain what's in each one. But I love that light block. Boom.
Yeah. So block of light work, the goal was make myself feel as good as possible, as healthy as possible, as ready to go into another comp prep as I can, rather than going in with a bit of tendonitis, so my back's a bit sore. So like about a couple of weeks, just get myself ready. Mentally also a bit of a reset, thinking, right, comp's done, a couple of weeks, nice and light, not worrying about numbers. And then again, it was into comp prep for UK's. And then really it was full on. So it was kind of like UK's, Strongman Classic, comp prep, and then we were into prepping for SCL, Arnold's, England, and then Glasgow came up. The thing with Strongman is that you'll find, unless you're probably at the very, very top, like if you're like top 5 in the world, where you can probably pick and choose your comps beforehand. With me, it was like, I know I'm doing Brits, I know I'm doing UK's, and then it's like, oh, a Giants live spot's come up at Albert Hall, right, I'm in, perfect. Oh, an SCL spot's come up. Oh, an Arnold spot's come up. Oh, another giant live spot's come up. So my season's still a bit elongated without me planning that in. So planning kind of the full year is hard. It's not like some sports where you've got a very defined season.
Yeah.
It's like as and when things come up. So it's ended up being after that little kind of light prep phase after Brits, it's just been comp prep. And then really this last phase, it's all been one big comp prep trying to, you know, prep for a few comps at once, but it's not really been peaking as much because which one do you, like, where do you peak? He's just trying to be strong over a few weeks.
Yeah. So you've mentioned like two really simple things. Like people can get really super scientific, but people listening to this who compete at all levels can actually, I feel like, can just benefit from actually just making it even simpler. Like you've just said, like a light block and non-specific, and then comp prep as two things, and then within those, obviously, you can get really intricate and whatnot. But yeah, what I've been, I suppose, really impressed with, like you've obviously done your peak or your peak of the season or whatever. You finish your main comps of the year or whatever, and then straight away you've been looking to go into transition into this lighter block or off-season block or whatever. And then you've told me like some of the stuff that you've been doing, you know, like say going to do like more like some leisurely stuff and some just different forms of exercise, moving in different planes of motion and stuff like that. I just think it's absolutely brilliant because it can be like, I suppose, like someone like me, for instance, can find it difficult to back off enough.
Yeah.
Like I'd be thinking, right, I'll finish the competition. Right. I want to back off, like ideally in my head, but then a couple of weeks later, I'm thinking about, oh, well, this lift's feeling good, or can I hit a PB on that lift? And like, how do you manage the kind of resist the urge to do that?
I think with me, it's experience. I've just been doing it a long time. It's over 10 years now. So I've had that phase earlier on, and now I've really learned that you've got to be strong. Even more so recently, I'm not hitting PBs in the gym as much. I might be aiming for one or two, or sometimes none in a lift through a full block, just knowing that I've got to peak on a certain day for comp. It's a funny one with strongman, obviously, because it's not like, say, tennis. Like obviously, you play tennis and you do well at a tournament. With strongman, you've got very set numbers that you can hit in the gym. Like I can max my log in the gym. I can do 150 kilo farmers in the gym. But it's just realizing that I've got to peak and be strong in these set dates when it's my off season. I'm not worried about it. I'm worried what's going to take me to that point. So it's kind of taking the ego out of it. And also for me, when I have my off-season block, it's really fun. So I get to loads of different sports and stuff. It's just really enjoyable. So I look forward to it. Last couple of weeks of training for comp, it was a bit like, I'm feeling a bit sore and beaten up, and I just want to do something different. And I see it all the time with guys and like, falling out of love. And it's like, I kind of get it if that's all you're ever doing, but it's really good to step back and do some other activities.
Yeah.
And you get quick progress on them. So like, say I'm going bouldering, I'll get 10 times better in this 5 week blocks, 5, 6, 7 week block. And it's great. It's good fun. Like, oh yeah, I'm way better than I was.
Yeah.
Whereas on the log press, you get 12 weeks to get 2% better. So it's that nice reset in your head of doing these things that are quite new or things that you haven't done a lot of. And you get better really quick. And it's just nice and refreshing.
So good. So putting a different angle on that and disagreeing slightly with part of it. Like I think a big thing for you is, and again, what I find so inspiring is like someone said, I can't remember who it was, it said recently, you had a 20-year plan for strongman.
Oh, it was, yeah.
Yeah. And I just thought that's amazing. And I feel like I've got really good long-term plans in the sport, but I'm not like, there's a lot of people who, like, I believe you're all in with it. You know what I mean?
Yeah.
And I think you do with me to an extent. But I feel like there's a lot of people who just think that, especially obviously the lower that you go down, like they might think that like they might feel like they're all into it now, but they could very easily fall out of luck.
I see it all the time.
Do you know what I mean?
There's a guy, a lad I know who was doing, I won't mention him because it's do whatever you want, but he was doing really well at strongman, and then you can tell he's quite into bodybuilding, and now he's switched over to more bodybuilding style of training. But he was saying like, "Oh, I'm really dedicated to this. I've got these long-term goals," and you see a lot, and you're like, "They probably haven't," because you get a bit of success. You do that early bit where you're not very good, and then you're an improver, intermediate. You're progressing really quick. You think you've got it nailed.
Yeah.
You're training 6 times a week. You've got your meal prep. You're doing well at competitions, and you're building like your own buzz around yourself.
Yeah.
And then you get to a point where it's not new anymore, and it starts to be a bit stale. And you find a lot of guys that they hit a point like that, and they realize actually, oh no, I don't want to.
Yeah.
Because any sport's easy when you're good at it.
Yeah, making those gains.
But it's when you have a stall and you've got to get through that, and you've got 3 months where you feel like you're not really improving much. Or like, I mean, I had 4 years without getting a deadlift PB.
Yeah.
That's tough. That is tough to keep thinking, no, I'm gonna do it. It's coming. So for 4 years to think I've got a plateau to trust it's going to come good, it's hard mentally. So you do see a lot of guys where they're like, I've got this big plan. And it's
I suppose, right, what I'm saying is that I think this approach that you're taking is beautiful and ideal. I do think it's absolutely brilliant and 100% agree with it. But someone coming into the sport, say me, I don't know, like 6 years ago or something like that, like I know obviously, like a massive thing that I always say to people is like, take ownership, know yourself, like you take control, like get the guides from or programs or whatever, help from experts, but always like take everything with a pinch of salt and create your own philosophy kind of thing. And like, I know that physiologically, like taking the approach of what you're saying would be better for most people long term. Yeah. But I feel like if I'd have taken that approach, I would have just wouldn't been as interested in it and probably be doing something else. Like a thing that's kept me engaged at like like say the first 5 years, is actually I started lifting in the gym because I love like going high percentages. Do you know what I mean? I love doing a heavy single. I love doing a heavy triple. I love doing something. I love failing. I love pushing to that point. And I suppose like what I've kind of learned over time, and don't get me wrong, it's not perfect. That's why I've got niggles and stuff. But on a lot of lifts, I know that I know my limits. And a lot of people see stuff on social media and think, oh God, he's going heavy again on that. But I'll only work at a high percentage on stuff that I know that I can recover from. Do you know what I mean? So that's like a kind of, say, someone being at the other end of the spectrum in terms of that kind of, like I want to. I
like the specificity of it.
Yeah, I like specificity, and I like high intensity, like relatively, like more frequently than most people. Yeah. And I suppose like I've kind of created my own system where I know that I can 9 times out of 10 I can recover really well. Yeah. And keep progressing. But for me, it matches up with my mentality a lot more, and keeps me engaged. And I hit that, and then the rest of my session or the rest of my training week, if I hit something that I'm like gives me that buzz, then that'll give me I'll be like, right, I'm satisfied now. Now we'll go and do the graft. Do you know what I mean? Mm. And I actually do, like, even though it's physiologically not necessarily optimal to train like that, like the trade-off is the rest of my training, I'm so much more engaged because I'm like, right, I'm going to be a good boy now. I'm going to do all this. I'm going to be an absolute boss at these because I've got that kind of, and I know it's like kind of contradicting yourself because like very often we'll talk about like delaying gratification and stuff. Yeah. But I suppose
you need enough to keep in the game, don't you?
And I suppose it's quite an interesting thing. But yeah, that's what I'm so impressed with you is like I suppose like you very often go. You touched on it before when we talked about the energy system thing. You very often go lighter than what people
train too light.
Yeah. Like people. What's Paul Smith? He's lifting. Why is he only lifting that? Lifting at that percentage. But like. Obviously, the proof's in the pudding. Yeah,
like, been training too light for 12 years, which gives you an idea of if you figure that one out.
So moving on to the next one. So we've touched on it a bit anyway. So how do you periodise your training to stay clear of injury so well? So we've said about the the light phase and then the more specific phase. And I use that analogy of, you know, the light phase putting into the bank account, and then your comp phase you can take out of it.
Yeah.
And like the more that you can kind of put in at this side without doing what I'm saying about, you know, getting that gratification of that heavy single or whatever, the more that you can put in, the more you're going to be able to milk out at this side. So
I don't know if it's it is periodising, because obviously I know I've been training so long now. I know where my recovery capacity is. Generally erring on the side of caution. Like, I'll do some stuff that's a bit daft, but 99% of my training's within, you know, what I know I can comfortably do. Again, it's a case. I think something I'm really good at is being in that parasympathetic state. I can switch off really easily, so I can recover well, and that lets me train more. And the train more, you become more resilient. Another thing is training a lot of different planes of motion. I'm a big believer that if you can handle being in awkward positions, if you get out of position on a lift, you're less likely for something to pull or tear or strain. So when you see someone like doing, I don't know, getting really rounded over on a squat or something, if I've done Zercher deadlifts where I'm in like complete maximal flexion, I'm lifting quite heavy in that, getting pulled out on a squat isn't anything to really worry about. So I think it's being resilient in a lot of different kind of planes of motion, but also just building that understanding of your recovery capacity and how hard you can push. An example, I did overdo it. I did training for the Arnold's yoke. I did a 420 yoke, 4 sets of 10 meters, which is a lot more volume than I'd done before. But that was just a case of with getting married, I kind of had to jump forward a little quicker than I would have done. I'd have liked to have a couple more sessions leading up to that than I did. So I kind of got it wrong there. But 95% of the time, I know exactly what I can handle. So I rarely get to a point where I'm doing too much. I used to all the time earlier on. But this last few years, I really nailed it down more, where I can really tell quickly if something's going to be too much or how long I can sustain something for. I think UK's was a good one because it was a 12-week prep. It was really long, really easy to overreach on preps that are that long, especially with having just peaked for Brits beforehand. But I didn't quite nail it perfectly because the last week I was a little bit down, but I had good 11 weeks of hitting everything. And I just felt amazing, incredible once I'd actually peaked. So that knowing your limits for that long and getting such a big long cycling was brilliant.
I think that's a brilliant point that you said about the lighter phase, about you referred to the Zercher, whatever, but like preparing positions or whatever. A thing that I like to think of is like in your competition phase, like if you hit your perfect technique on stuff on every lift or perfect positions, then you find that your recovery is a lot easier generally. And but the kind of what you're building in these resilience in what people may describe as suboptimal positions, I see as like you're buying your margin for error.
Yes, exactly.
So it's like you see people that they have awesome technique in the competition phase on certain stuff, but then when it gets to a grind, they just stop or something. Like say you might see people see moving events and they're exhausted, and then the feet are moving out and the hips are opening up, and whereas, or like say you're rounding in a deadlift or a squat, or like say collapsing knees collapsing on the dip of a press or something.
Yeah.
But find that building up the resilience in these positions and preparedness is magic. So last little thing on this section. So considerations for natty athletes.
So my big thing with this is don't worry about it. I used to read all sorts of stuff, saying different. Be if you're natural, blah blah blah. You've got to consider there isn't any. Just train. Just do what makes you better. There's I don't think there's anything really to come on to, except maybe that if you're natural, you can probably handle more work, which is counterintuitive to everything you've ever read. But you'd generally be recovering a little bit better. I don't know if that's a sympathetic thing, sympathetic parasympathetic thing. I don't know if you'll generally be lifting a little bit less load. But yeah, I wouldn't change anything at all. And the thing is, if you're natural, you're not natural. it's either one or the other. So it's not like you can, I was natural for a bit and then I wasn't, and then I was natural for a bit and then I wasn't. So you're only kind of getting one shot at changing your training, if you know what I mean. So I think it's just keep it simple. The same principles will work. I don't think there's many considerations at all.
Yeah, I think it's a bit of a loaded question, really, because like considerations for a natty athlete, you haven't known any different.
That's what I'm trying to say.
Like, so, like you don't need to do anything different. Just do what you're doing now, and then if you decide that you want to take performance enhancing drugs at some point, then you can maybe consider like. Well, let's talk about it, because I'm sure we don't need to name anybody.
It's the most uncomfortable chairs ever sat on.
But like, what are things that you've noticed in, like, say, coaching people who are like don't take gear or do take PEDs?
What have I noticed? They get injured more. If they lose their head more often. They expect things to be easier, and then sometimes when they aren't easier, that can throw them off. That's a big one. And then I'd say the big thing is if you're off, not training as hard as when you're on. That's a massive thing. So you lose a lot of time when you could be getting better, where you're not as strong. So you think, oh, I'm not as strong, so I'm not going to bother training. See that a lot. Or not training as intensely. And again, that's a great time to do these lighter blocks and more skill-based blocks.
Yeah.
So you can still make different gains in different areas.
I think that's particularly like using your kind of framework or whatever that we've just discussed. Like for people who are, like, say, peaking using gear, peaking towards a comp, and then they hit a peak, and then they're coming off for a bit, or they're cruising or whatever. Like, I find that some people struggle with the kind of setting the goals appropriately and their expectations, like like basically coming off or hitting the peak and like keeping engaged, because a lot of people, like, keeping it simple, they come off and they feel like they can't lift what they can do. So what's the point?
Sure.
Whereas actually putting, like, say the, doing the lighter kind of framework that you've said, like it's great because they're not like kind of objective measures to get obsessed with. Do you know what I mean?
You're not testing your numbers as much, like you.
So I think be careful, like, for people taking gear, like, be careful with working at percentages, especially at different phases. Like how you handle percentages as you in a comp, in a peak for a comp is going to be very different to obviously when you're doing a lighter phase and stuff. And that
is a good consideration. The same person when they're on and off will be different. I don't think there's really much to change between people that either are taking something or aren't. But you yourself, you're going to feel different. So I think that's something to work on. If suddenly you feel a bit flat, obviously your energy levels are lower. You just don't feel as strong mentally as much as anything else. You need to be aware of that to plan your training in.
Yeah.
So I've seen I've had a client a couple of times, and like, things going back. So I'm like, what are you trying different methods? Like, I've been off gear 6 months. Like, I didn't know you're on. So I was on then when we were hitting PBs, and I've been off.
Yeah.
And it's like, well, I had no idea. I'm trying to figure everything.
So I think, again, like, it's something that I talk about all the time. It's like, communicate. If you're working with a coach, communicate with your coach. Like, if you're like, say, someone like Paul, for instance, who, like, quite famously within this niche, like, is natty. Like, don't feel that he's going to, like, that you have to keep it from him.
Yeah, I get that a lot.
I've had it in the past where people haven't told me, and then I found, like, like, I suppose one of our kind of good characteristics we have in common in terms of coaching, like, we're not judgmental. We don't, like, have, like, we don't, like, I don't even have an opinion.
Yeah, exactly.
Like, to the point of, like, what do you think? Like, we don't actually have an opinion. It's like what we're dealing with in
of course,
everything, the big picture, right? And how do we get a little bit better for next week? Yeah. So the more data and the more significant things that we know about you, the the better the training's going to be. So it goes with anything, like it, you know, like say beyond like taking gear and stuff. Like if you've got stuff that you're dealing with that's under the surface, if you're struggling with stuff outside of training, if you're struggling with nutrition, if you're struggling with relationships, or you're having a hard time at work, because communicate.
I always make sure I find out what people do as a job, because it's like if you have someone who's a student, and when you're a student, you pretty much a dasser around. If you live at home and you just train all day, especially if you're like me, you didn't really care about your degree. You just lived at home, trained all day, you're buzzing. Compared to someone who's a manual labourer 5-6 days a week, they've got 3 kids and a missus. You've got to cut that into account. But if you didn't tell me that, if I assume one because you hadn't told me the other, your program's not going to be optimal. So make sure you tell your coach as much as you can.
Brilliant. So move on to the next thing that we've just touched on. Actually, you're saying about somebody's asked how to cope in the past. How to cope in the past and stay focused and remain on top of training when life gets busy, child, work, relationships, and stuff. So, yeah, you obviously you haven't had a child yet, Paul, but you know what it's like. But you know what it's like to be busy and whatnot. Like how do you keep focused and like keep juggling? So every aspect of your life, you feel like you're being relatively successful in terms of you getting better at everything. Like
the biggest thing with this, I can say, just prioritise. I'm not going to sit and pretend I've had loads of stuff to deal with at once, because training's always been a big priority of mine. But prioritise and have a plan. The less busy you are, the less you really need a plan, because you can just wing your way through it and you'll figure it out. But if you're really busy, I need a routine. I'm doing this on this day. You might train twice a week, but at this time for 90 minutes, I'm training twice a week. So I think it's just prior planning. And the more things you have going on, you need to prioritize them in what order and how much time each is going to get. And then you're going to say, right, this time is going in there and this time is going in there. Guys that I know that have been really busy and been successful, they're on the ball. Every hour's accounted for in the day. And it can be quite tough, obviously, but you need to plan first. Because if you start thinking, oh, am I doing this? Shall I do that? You've kind of lost before you've even started. So the more stuff you have, really just get a kind of a diary, a plan, a schedule, and make sure you stick to it and think about it. And I had a good one, a mate of mine who was doing his PhD, and he used to train early, get it in while he was fresh, and then he'd be working all day lecturing, doing his PhD, and he'd be knackered by the end of the day. But then he realised, well, I like training. Even if I feel dead and my mind's blown, I look forward to training. So he started coming in early, doing his work really early, and he had training to look forward to, because he's going to enjoy training. No matter how dead he is, it will get him up for it. So he found switching around and training at the end of the day, when physically he was more tired, but mentally he was a bit fresher for it because he'd been looking forward to it. Kind of carried him through on his really busy spells.
Brilliant. So I find on this that having a growth mindset, and even if you don't have a growth mindset, working towards developing a growth mindset in terms of, like, say, fixed mindset versus growth mindset. So you have people who are like, well, I can't be organized. Like you said about the importance of being organized, for instance. Yeah. People are like, oh, I'm just disorganized, and they put themselves into that box.
Like saying I'm weak.
Yeah, exactly. Whereas somebody with a growth mindset will say that maybe I find it challenging to be organized, but blah 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 blah, and they'll have a way, like they'll have a plan to like building towards a solution. So for me, like I've always struggled with being punctual, being organized, I struggle with like remembering things. Whereas like people like who know me like within the last couple of years, like some people would actually say that I am punctual, I am organized, like I'm structured with a lot of things. And it's something that in order to be successful within the different contexts, so here, so say like with training, work, being a dad, being supportive to my partner and stuff, like being relatively successful and getting a little bit better with all of these consistently, that's something that I have had to take the bull by the horns and actually get better at. And actually, you know, like say employing systems, like it sounds crazy, but like using the calendar on my phone to schedule things in, using notes on my phone for everything, like even the way that I communicate with people, like say even the way that I communicate with clients and stuff, like say I'll chat, like if I see people in person, I'll have a chat with, like say we'll chat about stuff. But if there's anything like that's really pressing or really important, I'll always say, look, just email me or send me a message on whatever. So then I've got a record of this. So then
you're not trying to remember it and
exactly. This is a key. So actually, instead of like taking that kind of that negative mindset of like, oh well, I don't have a good memory, it's actually changing, like creating systems and putting systems in place within your context. So I actually don't use my memory. So I don't rely on it because I don't need to, because I'm like, well, why would I stress or give myself the anxiety of trying to remember to meet you? You know, like a bit like you scheduling this and like saying, right, well, tell me a time, Paul, and I'll work around that. You know, rather than
it's on a message too, isn't it? So you can read it.
Yeah, that's it.
And say to me.
And like so I don't even try and remember that. I just know that I'm in before. Oh, what time is it before? And it's kind of scheduled in, and it, even so much as like how I've done that with training, for instance. Like instead of, I think this, I can remember the reason why I train on the days that I do. I train Monday and Friday 4:00. Right, because when I started training strongman and training with Paddy and Hicksy, they were saying like, when do you want to train or whatever? And they said, right, Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, 4 till 6. 4 till 6 was what Hicksy wanted. So I committed to that, and that's what I do. That's what I do. So I've trained like every Monday for like missed when I've been abroad and stuff, but like every Monday, every Friday when I'm here, like it's just like clockwork. And the point is when you schedule something like that and put the systems in place, like I would actually say that most of the time that I train, because like I'll work before, I'll have like other stuff scheduled in that of course like goes over sometimes. Like most of the time, I would say like over 50% of the time when I go to train, it's not the convenient thing to do. And it's like I've had to peel myself away from something that maybe if I wasn't so committed to being an athlete and whatever, that maybe like very often time, like the other stuff is probably a bit more important.
Yeah.
Like very often. But in terms of like the goals that I've set as an athlete and it is a juggling act, like taking in the say being an athlete, being a coach and running a business, running a relationship, but like making a relationship work and like bringing up a child. They're like my 4 pillars personally, and I feel like a lot of people have that in common. But yeah, that's all that I care about, and getting a little bit better at all of those things each week. And it is a juggling act. But I find that having the systems in, taking ownership,
that's the biggest thing.
That's the biggest thing. And like say if you and Shannon you like disagree on something or whatever, like you have to come to it might not be immediate, but you have to come to a resolution because you know that if you don't resolve that, then it's going to affect training. It's going to affect your work. So it's actually, so there might be times where you're hitting an important training week, but actually, you still turn up for your sessions, but actually the goal of that training week might actually be to fix that relationship or fix that issue or whatever that feeds into the other stuff.
I remember training once after an exam, and obviously there's a few exams at once, and I went into training, I couldn't do anything because I couldn't compartmentalize it. Like leave that there and then go and train, even though I thought I'd be fine. And literally I was so weak, I was terrible. I just couldn't switch off. Where it's something I got better at, where it's like, right, training for these 2 hours, I'll worry about anything else after that. COVID was a good one because probably like most coaches, was absolutely my revenue just suddenly making no money because all my clients had left. So I had to go and train for 2 hours, not think about that, train, then I'll worry about that after. But worrying about it while I'm in between sets of squats was not going to do anything positive.
Yeah.
So just switching after
dangerous.
that. Yeah, exactly. Yeah.
Dangerous.
So it was like, right, I'm trading now. I'll worry about what I'm going to do after that.
So again, and these are the kind of skills, like you're saying about compartmentalization. Like this is the kind of thing that you need to take ownership of and have like an open mindset with, because this is the kind of thing that people very often say, "Oh, I can't do that." It's not something that is innate. It's something that you develop, isn't it? It's a skill.
Yeah.
Like you actually get better at that. Like logically, you look at, right, well, if I want to get better at this and this, is it going to be beneficial if I do a little bit of both and they cross over a little bit? Or is it going to be better if I give that the most attention for that little block and then completely switch into the other, which is going to give the greatest net positive?
Yeah.
And it's most of the time, it's going to be, like you say, compartmentalizing.
Yeah.
So if you agree with that logically, then it's about creating systems what can achieve this. So again, this might be too simple and not cool enough
to actually implement
for people to
because
implement.
most things people just won't do it because it seems too easy.
But just getting a calendar and I think like just going back to the thing that I said before about me kind of like say like going heavy all the time, whatever. Like recently I've hit my kind of peak of won a competition that I enjoyed 3 or 4 weeks ago, and then since then I've like backed off and found it it's weird when you're in the stresses when you're in like that, you've got the kind of you're prepping for a comp or whatever. It's almost easy to not, like, I've got, right, I know I need to hit these sets and reps, blah 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 blah. So I need to be there for that time to warm up, to get back home for tea, to do that. So I need that window. Whereas the thing that I found a little bit more challenging is like transitioning into the lighter block, what we said, and then almost like having a bit more freedom. So it'd be like, oh, it doesn't matter if I'll be 15 minutes late and then it'll be fine. And then
that's what I ended up with today, so a bit late, and I thought, but I don't mind doing it on these blocks, especially early on, because it's like, right, I'll push the pace and I'll get through everything really quick.
Yeah.
And I'll get a bit of conditioning thingy. But yeah, it's completely different to comp prep when it's like I need 2.5 hours or 3 hours, whatever it is. These sessions, they'll be a bit more, well, let me challenge myself, see if I can do 2-minute rest for the whole sets, for the whole session. So yeah, but it is easy to drop the ball, isn't it? But I think if you can get that mental break of not quite having to be as strict for a little period of time, it's really beneficial. So you can kind of have a bit of a mental deload, if you like, as much as a physical one.
But I think changing the goalposts within that can be beneficial, because the going against what you just said, like the thing that I've had to manage is like, right, well, I'm doing this phase where I'm going lighter, and I'm kind of confusing doing the lighter phase with not being quite as important. So these other things, what I've said about these like kind of balancing act, these other things, actually I found myself doing more work.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? To the point where my training's been compromised. So a thing that's helped me recently, instead of being like so anal about the sets and reps, what I'll say, right, well, I can be a little bit later, or I can finish a little bit later, but I've got to turn up, and on my Monday session, I've got to do 2 hours. It doesn't have to be. I'm just turning up and I'm engaged for 2 hours without looking at emails and social media and stuff. Just 2 hours of work. So then, since I've done that, I've realised that, oh, bloody hell, if I let myself like be late to turn up to the session, then I can't have my tea till 20 to 8. Instead of being home for 6:45. And so that's made me more accountable to being better at the other stuff. Is that like timed window, even though within that it's like there's less pressure in what I'm actually doing.
Yeah, I get you. I actually think that's the point you make about being as important. For me, in kind of the off-season block, I'm a bit more worried about missing a session. Like, I won't miss a session for this, I think 6-7 weeks at all. I won't do it. Whereas if I'm in a comp prep and I wake up and I'm dead one day, I'm aware that I might have just overdone it. I'll miss. I don't mind. I'll skip one. I'll do a bit more recovery work, and I'll not push too hard to then, have a kind of domino effect. I'll just take a day. Whereas in blocks where I'm going lighter, I know if I don't want to do it, just because I'm being soft, rather than any real fatigue that's stopping me. So it is getting that importance of the lighter stuff isn't necessarily less important, and not just thinking because it's an easy session, it's one I can sack off.
Yeah, brilliant. So when you getting ready for these sessions, Paul, so pre-workout nutrition, what do you have before a session? Do you use pre-workouts? Do you use caffeine?
I will.
And how does it change when you get to a comp?
I'll generally have a Monster before my event session just because we leave early. I'm not a big pre-workout guy at all. I will very occasionally have them, but I will save it for when I really, really, really need a boost. It's been a while since I've had one, but the one I use, it's Team Affinity. Oh God, I forgot a good plug. This it's
Primal.
It's Primal, but it's
no.
Primal Core, which is a really basic one anyway. So it's not super hardcore high stim. So even when I use that, it's nothing too crazy. I'm not a big
links in the description.
I
don't know how to do that.
It's all right. Yeah. But there are. I mean, that's basic one. There's levels above that with crazy amounts of stimulants in. So even when I do take a pre-workout, it's not very intense, shall we say. I can get like switched on so easily. Like Shannon got a stopwatch the other day. And I was trying to see how quickly I could press the two buttons, so like the shortest time, and my heart rate started going and adrenaline started going a bit. So I'm really good at getting switched on. So I don't generally need much of a kick unless I'm really, really feeling it or want to go like next level height for a session. How long before a session though? As close as possible for me. Yeah, I'll try and eat as pretty much as close as I can. I don't really have any issues training after I've just eaten like some people do.
So you've touched on that, like the kind of getting fired up and putting the on switch for the session. But what about like say, like in the couple of hours before, like is there anything? Do you have like a pre-workout meal? Do you like say what do you have like any different kind of stuff on training days, like breakfast or whatever? If you train before training, or do you just generally?
No, it's pretty much the same. Weekends we might eat slightly differently, but not really majorly. I generally train 6 days a week anyway, so it's only really Sundays that I don't train. Yeah. So I mean, I'll eat and then I'll go to the gym. If I'm training in the morning, or if I'm training in the afternoon, I'll eat and I'll eat lunch and then I'll go to the gym. There isn't any big routine before I train. It's eat. If I'm training at home, I'll eat, chill 20 minutes and then go and train.
Yeah, I think this is another example of like one of those things that we're not saying anything revolutionary, and I think it's really important because there are so many kind of businesses that make so much money off like nutrition, and that they've got the secret to the response that you're looking for actually. Whereas actually, I just find and what I recommend to people is I say it all the time, but finding what works for you. Find what foods that make you feel good, or like just generally feel good, and then
wait as long as you feel like you need to train.
Yeah, I think it's really, really important. Like because I think a lot of people make the error of getting to like say competition and then changing the habits like acutely, like before the comp or on comp day.
Better.
And you like the problem is with that. Like how often do you see at comps people struggle with like digestive issues, or they're kind of feeling sick as they're coming up to the bar, or they feel like they need to go to the toilet or whatever. And realistically, it's because the change in the kind of what they usually do.
Yeah.
Like if you feel generally pretty good and your energy levels are stable, like most of the time during the week, like it's even more important that you kind of dial into that for when you're at competition, because you want to be replicating that.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean?
It's when you see people ask me about carb loading, it's like, we don't need carb load, we're competing for 5 minutes. It's like, but don't, it's like, you've got as much energy, just have a good meal, make sure your food's regular a few days before, make sure you eating a decent meal before you compete, have something to keep you going, but you don't need to do anything special. It's not a hugely energy demanding sport like running a marathon is, where you'd actually carb load. So don't overcomplicate it.
So final little bit on this, just linked to the last one, any go-to pre-workout meals and snacks. So for me, again, like just touching on the last point, like just taking ownership. In fact, just reflect on what you did rather than looking at, say, like looking for articles and looking at what your favorite athlete does in terms of eating and nutrition. Like just actually look back to where this is a good way to look at things, right? Look back at when you on your social media, when you've hit like a good lift, or when you felt really great in the gym, and then try and work out what you were doing in the lead up to that. What were you eating? What was your sleep like? What were your habits like in the lead up to that lift or that session where you felt really good? And then just try and replicate it and copy it. So I've noticed for a thing personally for me, like before training, I actually find that having protein and fats, like say eggs works really well for me. Like if I have like loads of like a big carby breakfast, like a good few hours before a train, then I find that my energy levels are a bit more like up and down. Whereas I feel that personally, I feel more stable off like fats and protein. But if I know that if I get like, for some reason, when I get close to like say an overhead session, like say log, sometimes I've found that like say having like say some easy digesting carbs like an hour before, you know, like say a little bowl of porridge or cream of rice or some bagels or something before a session can help me not go lightheaded as much. And that's just something that's specific to me. Whereas you might find people who the other way around, like they feel like they respond better to having loads of carbs in the morning, carbing up in the morning. Like what do you find works for you, and what kind of patterns have you seen? Any patterns with clients or anything?
With my, I have carbs for every meal, so I don't know any different. I'll sometimes train after my breakfast, which might be malt wheaties or frosties if Lidl don't have malt wheaties in, or I'll sometimes train after lunch, which is whatever Shannon has made us. Honestly, I don't. As long as I have a lot of food and then I train. As long as I feel, it kills my energy. It kills my sessions if I start to feel hungry. So I do try and eat close enough, and have something to keep me going. It might just be like, well, Jaffa cakes. I say it. People ask me what they have during comp, I'm like Jaffa cakes, and I feel like I should have something more complicated. But yeah, as long as I don't feel hungry throughout a session, I'm good to go. And for the longer sessions, it will have some like little snacks throughout just to keep me going. If it's this kind of general 2-hour gym session, I'll just have a biggish meal before. Well, all my meals are quite biggish meal beforehand and train through it. I think with this one is, like you say, find what works for you, because I can't tell you what I eat. You might be all bloated and feel awful. Just find what works for you. Try a few different things. And when something feels good and it's fine, just stick with it.
Yeah.
Or stick with something on that kind of same. If it's, I don't know, if it's carbs and fats, like you say, or carbs and protein, just stick with that rough combination and you can't go far wrong.
Yeah. And I think like say during comp or during the session, I don't really eat, and I really, really struggle to drink during the session. Like I just don't drink whatsoever, which I feel like, anyway, that's a slightly different thing, but like during competition, because it's like such a, very often it might be like say 3 to 6 hours. Like you do need to eat there, even if you don't feel particularly hungry. So I find that what's a really important thing is personally having carbs, and ideally easy digesting carbs. And again, that's going to be individual to you. So Paul used a great example of using Jaffa cakes. This is another example. You can spend an absolute fortune on fancy sports companies like fancy gels and whatever.
I've realised this watching Tour de France, and they were having cans of Coke before they went up Alpe d'Huez, and I was like, yeah, they just need sugar.
Yeah, well,
they just need sugar.
That's it. You look like
a bit of caffeine too when you're halfway 5.5 hours into a stage.
like Lucozade, for instance. Like what is it? It's just it's a drink with like loads of sugar in, isn't it? So like I love having, like I used to love it when I was younger, like having Coca-Cola. Like it's just amazing. So like I started having those on comp days, like cans of Coke, and it's amazing. Great, but like people look at you like, oh, I thought you were an athlete kind of thing.
I got this because I went to when I was getting married, I was in Cyprus. I went to this gym and I had a bottle of Pepsi. He was like, oh, it's like your pre-workout. And I'm like, if this was Lucozade Sport, not about an eyelid. Or Lucozade Sport with some caffeine tablets, not about an eyelid. But I've got a Pepsi, which is a bit of caffeine and sugar. And he's like, is that a pre-workout? Then I was too strong for his gym, and he started saying I was going to break the building down. So that showed him. But yeah, if it feels good and it makes you feel good, stay with it. Don't worry about it. It's not being complicated or fancy enough.
Yeah. So, personally for me, like I love eating, and I generally like eating my calories. So stuff like, even though I will enjoy a can of Coke now, but like I'd rather have like some, like say easy digestible fast sugars, like say, like a bag of midget gems or something. Or if I'm wanting something a little bit slower releasing but easy digestible, stuff like Snacker Jacks or rice cakes, like I really enjoy, and I find like I digest them really well. Or bagels. If I have stuff like pasta or like say toast and stuff like that, I feel like I just feel like I struggle to digest it as well. So, but again, like everybody's going to be different to this. So explore, take ownership, and reflect. Boom. Peace out.